The purpose of this hearing is to consider three bills pending before the Subcommittee on Public Lands and Forests. There are S. 3294, the Central Idaho Economic Development and Recreation Act, sponsored by Senators Crapo and Rich. S. 3310, my legislation to designate certain wilderness areas in South Dakota. And S. 3313, the Sloan Hills Withdrawal Act, sponsored by Senators Reed and Ensign. Several of our colleagues have asked to speak on these bills today, and in addition, we have representatives from the BLM and Forest Service and a panel of 5 witnesses from South Dakota, Nevada, and Idaho testifying this afternoon. So we have a lot of ground to cover in a limited amount of time. I'd like to take a few minutes to speak on S. 3310, and then following that, recognize Senator Barrasso for any opening statement he would like to make. I thank Senator Wyden for holding today's hearing and the opportunity to consider landmark legislation protecting America's Great Plains grasslands. I want to welcome Dan O'Brien and Scott Idioff and thank them for taking the time to travel to Washington, D.C. to share their perspectives on these important matters. In May, I introduced the Tony Dean Cheyenne River Valley Conservation Act to establish the first grasslands wilderness area in the U.S. and provide the public with a unique experience to enjoy these public lands. These lands are already managed as wilderness. The Cheyenne River Valley and the Buffalo Gap National Grassland includes some of the finest prairie wilderness in the U.S., located among isolated buttes and the wide Cheyenne River Valley. These lands remain undisturbed in the form that the native people who first inhabited these lands long ago would recognize. The effort to protect these ancient lands is a citizen-driven and buttressed by the support of groups representing over 100,000 South Dakotans. In 2002, the U.S. Forest Service, under the Bush administration, recognized the value of prairie wilderness in the Buffalo Gap and recommended certain lands for inclusion in the National Wilderness Preservation System. I have heard from a number of people regarding wilderness over the years. Sportsmen have contacted me describing the unique experience of hunting in areas far from the reaches of modern civilization. They talk about experiencing hunting as previous generations did and wanted to pass along that experience to the kids and grandkids. I have also heard from conservationists about the value of this area for native prairie plants and wildlife. Others have pointed to the potential economic benefits of wilderness as these outstanding lands join travelers who in turn contribute to the regional economy. My bill is a modest proposal. Less than 10% of the lands in the Buffalo Gap National Grassland, and I have made several compromises that will enhance the public enjoyment while allowing for common sense management and respect for ranchers holding permits to run cattle on these lands. Grazing is an important component of the grassland ecosystem, and this wilderness legislation ensures continuation of grazing for those who have made their living off these lands. Sound management and long-standing restrictions on motorized travel have preserve the outstanding natural quality of these areas. My legislation provides the Forest Service the tools to manage the lands to maintain their character in perpetuity. The bill allows for the control of fire, insects, and invasive species, and it also ensures that the Forest Service can continue to appropriately manage prairie dog populations on these lands. In most respects, I have followed the Forest Service recommendations in preserving important access to the areas, and I am pleased that the Forest Service supports this legislation. By designating a portion of the Cheyenne River Valley as wilderness, it is possible to protect its undeveloped character from encroaching motorized recreation while providing hunters, rock collectors, campers, and hikers a new way to enjoy prairie grasslands. In closing, I want to share with the committee why I came to name this bill in recognition of my longtime friend and great advocate for South Dakota's open spaces, the late Tony Dean. In his words, describing the purposes of creating a grasslands wilderness bill that I turned to for the best explanation for why this bill is necessary, Tony said that let's relate wilderness from the perspective of a hunter. It does not take a rocket scientist among hunters to recognize that once the opening salvo takes place on opening morning of the big game seasons, no matter where you live, the best hunting is almost always found far from the nearest road. That sentiment is what, in part, this legislation is aimed at creating, a place where the public and future generations can enjoy a unique wilderness experience found in a few places outside my great state of South Dakota.
It's good to be here, and it's good to have a chance to speak to this committee, and specifically to you, of course, in my support of House Bill 3310. My name is Dan O'Brien, and I live and operate a live on and operate a ranch adjacent to the Indian Creek Wilderness area proposed. My wife and I run both cattle and buffalo, and we hold the largest grazing permit in the Indian Creek area. My livelihood is absolutely dependent upon the grasslands that surround my home, so I have a huge stake in this legislation. I bought my first cattle in 1974. I've long been a member of the South Dakota Stock Growers Association, and I'm an avid hunter. I lived on the Great Plains all of my adult life, and I've weathered the winters and the droughts. I've experienced the violent swings in cattle prices and the stresses of severe credit crunches. While I'm a proud member of the community that will be directly affected by the wilderness, I have always had an interest in western South Dakota as it relates historically, socially, economically, and environmentally to the rest of the nation and indeed to the world. In addition to ranching, I've worked as a biologist, a teacher, and a writer. My area of consuming interest is the northern Great Plains, and I've researched and written a dozen books on the subject. In addition to my point of view as an in-the-trenches rancher, I bring a unique perspective to the question of Great Plains wilderness. It's my considered opinion that no American grassland better fits the spirit of the Wilderness Act than the Indian Creek area. Visitors to Indian Creek are uniformly awestruck by the beauty and the silence. From many of the high spots, you can see Mount Rushmore. It's too far away to see the faces, but I can feel Teddy Roosevelt staring down at me. I know that that good Republican president, war hero, and self-proclaimed Dakota man would approve of this bill. He was one of the first men of power to recognize that increasing population, accompanied by expansion of settlement and growing mechanization, were grave threats to the silence and solitude that helps keep us all sane. It's unfortunate that the debate over managing public lands has become so divisive that testimony is uncomfortable. Though the majority of South Dakotans are in favor of the Indian Creek Wilderness, some are animate in their opposition. Acrimonious disagreements between neighbors are particularly unproductive. They can be intimidating in a close-knit neighborhood, and they can tend to tamp down valuable debate. The fact is that nearly all South Dakotans share the desire to keep our land wild, healthy, free, quiet, and grazed. The rub comes in management of our lands. I'm a believer in America and the democratic government that we're participating in today. The Forest Service is part of that government, and I believe that considering the present low profile of the Buffalo Gap National Grasslands, that they do a good job. Is it perfect? Of course not. Would I like to see it done better? Absolutely. I appreciate the language that Senator Johnson has inserted into S3310 concerning the management of invasive species, fire, prairie dogs, as well as other issues important to ranchers. I believe management problems do not stem from a lack of Forest Service expertise or complacent staffing, but from a low position in the Forest Service list of priorities. Community support and involvement would go much farther at solving management problems than blind opposition. Elevating the visibility of Indian Creek is the best bet for improving its management. I'm a proponent of wilderness designation for 4 simple reasons. First, I find nothing in the Wilderness Act that would change my ranch's operations. Grazing shall clearly continue under the Wilderness Act and the Congressional Grazing Guidelines. Second, I believe that without this additional layer of protection, the Indian Creek area will eventually fall prey to the abuse and destruction of ever-expanding off-road traffic. Third, a prairie wilderness experience is a rare privilege that all citizens should be able to access. Finally, as a rancher and a businessman, I believe that wilderness adds value to South Dakota's economy through expanding opportunities for tourism, unique hunting experiences, and new forms of income generation for a way of life that has always needed to adapt to prosper. Thank you for letting me testify, and I'd be glad to answer any questions that I can.